I know that you worked with these two groups, Brand New Congress and Justice Democrats, to find and locate the women you were going to follow, but how did you choose them? What made you choose these particular four candidates to follow?
Yeah, so the reason we were interested in those organizations is because they were going to be recruiting these ordinary working people to run for Congress, and that aspect was very interesting to us as a personal story of it's going to be some kind of transformative process. I think as verite filmmakers, we're always looking for people who are going to be going through something over the course of the next year or two. And like I said at the beginning, we were looking for a story about solidarity, of people bridging divides across the country, working together in unexpected ways. So all of the candidates on these slates were going to be rejecting corporate funding, and they were going to be supporting each other through the process. Within that, I think that we interviewed about 24 candidates. I know that because I looked back and checked today. Interviewed about 24 candidates to consider them for the film, and spoke to a few others informally. And we really gravitated towards these four because we needed people that were going to be worth watching, win or lose. These were all long shot races. We did not have the resources to cover 30 races and then make a film about the winner. We were very interested in looking at what it takes for an ordinary person to become a viable candidate and challenge a political machine. So we knew in the process we'd be exploring those relations of power and the way power works in this country, and we knew there would be loss involved. So we needed people that were going to have that compelling screen presence and also very personal stories motivating them to run in the first place.
Well, my question at the end of this was, did you have a backup plan? What if they had all lost? Because the ending is so wonderful and inspirational and moving, but it was possible that they were all uphill races. They could all have lost. What was your plan if that was going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that a lot. It was a distinct possibility. I think we looked to Street Fight as an example of a film about a losing campaign, Cory Booker's first run for mayor in Newark years ago, and it's still a good story. And it's also, it explores political machines, and you see the beginning of the career of someone who very soon becomes a really outstanding voice in politics. So I think that was kind of our backup plan, Street Fight writ large around the country.
Our last film was seen as a very upbeat, inspirational kind of film, so I was actually kind of looking forward to the possibility of a darker, grittier storyline. But this is fine too.
That's right. Well, your success story, you now look very prescient for having followed Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from the start. Were you as surprised as she seemed to be when she won, or did you see it coming because you'd been on the ground with her the whole time?
I was with her in that moment, and I was as surprised as she was, only because you just never know. There aren't public polls. There are not. It certainly aren't exit polls. We had seen that momentum on the ground already in West Virginia and Nevada, those primaries had happened already by the time the New York primary rolled around. So we weren't counting on anything. That said, we believed in the possibility of this being a winnable race from the beginning. We knew the strategy. We knew that because of low turnout in that district, that the win numbers were actually lower. But the bottom line with all these races is that the whole objective of the Grassroots campaign is to turn out people who don't usually vote, especially not in midterm primaries. And when you're doing that, all bets are off. You really don't, it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen.
So, Robin, you're the editor. How many hours do you have to edit down to this really tight film? It works really well as a narrative, and you've got it down to 80-something minutes, but what did you have to do to get there?
We had about 275 hours to go through. Everything was so compressed. It was a really fast turnaround, and we had to bring in people to help. We brought a consulting editor, David Teague, who's a friend of ours, a fantastic editor, and Rachel and I and David, we worked incredibly hard to try to create these 86-minute drafts. Basically, we didn't have the leisure time to just spread out all sorts of scenes that we might want to consider. We had to just zero in with razor sharp focus on what we thought was the most important stuff. And I've never edited quite like that before, but it was a really exciting process.
We did spread out all the scenes with scene cards.
Yeah,
we did a lot of paper editing.
We did a lot of spreading out of cards on the floor for a while.
In your house, because by the way, you are married and you have a very small child who was even smaller when you were doing all this, right?
Yes, that's true. Yeah, he was 8 months when we started developing, then 1 and 2 through the course of production. He's 3 now. So we traveled around the country as a family, producing this film on a shoestring budget. And
my first job as producer was to watch Max, our son, while Rachel was out shooting in places like West Virginia and St. Louis.
yes, keeping things on track.
I used to take him to casinos in Las Vegas. And he came back and told his daycare teacher, "My daddy takes me to casinos." So it was great. It was a wild adventure.
Yeah, Robin started the edit during his 3-hour naps. We're very lucky that he's a good napper. And I think we couldn't have turned around the edit so quickly if we hadn't had an editor on board from the beginning who was really, with the project all the way along.
So do you all have questions? If you just raise your hand, we don't have microphones out there. Oh, we do. Okay, so if you can wait for the microphone to get to you so everyone can hear up there. He's running your way.
Hi, that was a really good film. My name is Anusha, and my question, it's a 2-part question. The first question is very low-hanging fruit. Are you doing the same thing for 2020? And a follow-up question, are you in the market for a colorist? If you are, I know a guy. His name's Keith Jensen from Technicolor.
Say that again. Say the last part again.
Oh, his name's Keith Jensen from Technicolor. He's great.
Okay, great. Keep it in mind for sure. We're very focused on getting this out right now. We're tossing around ideas of new projects, of course, but right now we are planning on, really focusing on the rollout of this film. We've got a huge impact campaign that we're supporting. There's grassroots screenings going on. The film became available today. It's opening in theaters in 11 cities and then also on Netflix, and it's available for community and educational screenings right away. We have a discussion guide that came out and a curriculum coming out in the fall for middle school, high school, and university levels. We're working with some fantastic organizations to make sure that the film can really be a tool for civic engagement, not just in this country, but around the world. It's been translated into 28 languages, and there's been, great conversation already about the relevance of these stories about grassroots movements and ordinary people feeling empowered to have a voice in the political process, and that's resonating all over the place with democracy movements. And so we're going to be concentrating on that for the moment, but I saw no plans at the moment to cover 2020, but I should mention that Cori Bush is running again in 2020. And Paula Jean Swearengin has said that she will run again in 2020, but she hasn't chosen a district yet. She's considering a few options. Amy is currently writing a book and says that she'll run again at some point, but she's looking at 2022 right now and supporting other candidates this cycle.
Is Cori running for Congress?
She's running for the same seat, yeah.
And, Alexandria is also running again in 2020.
That's true. Yeah.
Other questions? Yes, down here. If you wait for the microphone for 1 second.
Thanks. This was a great film. My question is about the other three, the three who didn't win. I don't think that their opponents were mentioned much in this film. Whereas we saw Crowley towards the end, we've seen him in different interviews and so on. Why didn't you include the opponents of the other three?
I can answer that.
Sure.
Yeah, I think the main reason you see less of the other opponents is because the other 3 candidates didn't get quite as close in the final weeks to get their opponents to challenge them in debates. I mean, Crowley, it got very hand-to-hand combat with Crowley in the final weeks of Alexandria's campaign, and there were more opportunities to film the 2 of them together. to see them at events where they both showed up. And that sort of thing just happened a lot less. It was a lot more like what you see at the Bronx debate. There was a little more snubbing, not wanting to take the opponent seriously by actually debating.
Right, that's correct. And all of the opponents did decline to be involved in the film, including Joseph Crowley. But because of the debates, we were able to sketch him more and make him more of a human being in the story.
Were there moments when you were thrown out of the room when the candidate said, no, you can't see this?
It wasn't so much, it was negotiations, all the way along. It wasn't so much, you can't do this. It was more like, this isn't going to work, this is going to work, let's talk about, so it's a negotiation process in any documentary. You talk about stuff up front, and then, you have to know when to push and when to hold back and let someone have their own experience. We couldn't obviously film things where our presence was going to interfere with the work that was being done. So that was really, the main sort of point of contention, if there was any. And for the most part, everyone was very willing to participate.
Other questions out there? You have the microphone. Well, they're all on the other side. Got that?
Do you suspect that Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez anticipates a primary challenge in 2020?
I think it's certainly possible. I think that she anticipates it in the sense that she's prepared for it. I mean, she certainly has dedicated volunteer base, and if we'll see. It's anybody's guess.
Other questions out there? Maybe over there?
Thank you for a really fascinating film. I was curious about what other political documentaries inspired you besides Street Fight. And secondly, recently we've had quite a few contemporary political biographies. There's literally an epidemic of films about Steve Bannon. And I'm curious where you see this, if there's anything distinctive about where this particular genre of documentaries is and where it's going as filmmakers and people interested in politics. Thanks.
That's such an interesting question. I think we're very inspired by a lot of verite films, certainly by The War Room as a political documentary as well. We're also inspired by strong narratives that aren't necessarily political documentaries. I think we're interested in making documentaries that that have a strong narrative drive and feel, perhaps like fiction films to watch in that regard. Do you have anything to add about others? I'm trying to think of others.
Those are the big ones.
Those are the big ones, right? I think those were the two that we talked about the most in the process. But as far as where the genre is going, I do think that it's a really interesting dynamic that we have going on right now in our politics, where so many candidates are telling their own personal stories on social media and agreeing to be in documentaries. We know there were a lot of other documentary crews out there in 2018, and there's some that are continuing and others that, that are probably new coming around this cycle. So candidates are agreeing to these projects, and in our case we were completely editorially independent. We made a firewall at the beginning to make sure everyone understood, this, we're not going to give you any footage for campaign ads, this isn't that kind of thing. I can't speak to other projects and whether they have that sort of arrangement or not, but our candidates saw the value. They didn't know what was going to happen with the elections, but they saw the value of documenting that process, of putting out the story in a long-form narrative of what it's like for regular people to run grassroots campaigns and to challenge political machines across the country. So to some degree, I think candidates are agreeing to this because they see the value in putting forward that sense of their own authenticity. But at the same time, we have kind of a media ecosystem, or I don't know, pot of boiling something, where there's a lot of just performance of authenticity as well. And I think we are very interested in the long form as a genre, to be able to inject some nuance into that political dialogue, that is so easily reduced to thumbs up, thumbs down, to love and hate on social media. And so that's what we're hoping that the film can put into that. And, I think other long-form political documentaries could do the same thing. I hope that's what happens.
Well, there's been such an explosion of documentaries, of interest in documentaries lately anyway, and obviously this film has changed the lives of the candidates who didn't win, too, because they have higher profile, maybe more than if they'd won those races, but they're out there talking about the film with you, and it's really changed their lives, too. I think we have time for one more question. Down here? Why don't you just go ahead and I'll repeat it. Right.
First of all, thank you all so much for making this. I was one of the millions of volunteers on one of these campaigns. You really brought it all back. I guess my question is, you said this was a response, the documentary was kind of made as a response to the election of Donald Trump. How much experience had you had with political organizing, or how involved were you in the process?
Okay, let me repeat it. You've said that this was made in response to the election of Trump. How much experience had you had in politics or political organizing or any of those grassroots activities yourself?
Yeah, do you want to take this one, Robin? I mean, we're both...
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny when you say that it was a response to Trump. I mean,
It makes it sound like that was just the beginning, but it wasn't.
Yeah, actually, Rachel really didn't want to make another political documentary. We've been making movies about grassroots organizing and community stuff. We actually, in the early days of working together, we were covering Occupy Wall Street as like citizen journalists.
Our last film was The Hand That Feeds, about a grassroots labor campaign of undocumented immigrants at a deli on the Upper East Side.
And what happened was Rachel was getting excited about the idea of a totally non-political subject. And
Totally
then-
non-political. I think I wanted to
All right, it
maybe
was political.
political adjacent.
And we were just ready to take a break from direct politics for just a little while, and then the election happened, and it was like, oh, we have to do something about...
Not a good time to take a break from political involvement.
Yeah.
That was more like that. I mean, we've been involved in social movements. Our last film was also really adopted into the low-wage worker and immigrants' rights movements as an organizing tool. We knew that we wanted this film to be an organizing tool for civic engagement, and so that was very much, in our DNA as filmmakers.
And it's important to also point out that the candidates we followed, all of them cared very much about changing this country before the 2016 election, and they're interested in moving forward, not just going back to before, rolling back the clock. They want something better than what we had before.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. I know this film will have a long life ahead of it, and thank you all for your questions, and thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much.